Have you ever wondered how durable the human body is? What would happen if you exposed it to extreme conditions, those that exceed the limits of comfort or even common sense? Get ready, because we are about to immerse ourselves in a fascinating journey to the limits of human endurance, discovering what our bodies can withstand before they say enough. Let's start with temperature. It is one of the most critical variables for life. The upper limit of body temperature that we are able to survive without serious damage to health is about 40 degrees Celsius. Even then, our functioning becomes risky for the body. Above this temperature, known as hyperthermia, our proteins, the building blocks of cells, begin to denature, and key internal organs, such as the brain, heart, or kidneys, can suffer irreversible damage. In a humid environment, where the body's natural cooling mechanism, i.e. sweating, is much less effective due to high air humidity, even ambient temperatures of 35 to 37 degrees Celsius can become life-threatening. People who try to break records in the sauna are a separate category. Although a tragedy occurred in 2010 at the World Sauna Championships, where one of the finalists died and the other was seriously burned, it showed the limits that should not be crossed. In fact, sauna records, although fraught with extreme risk, have reached as high as 16 minutes in ambient temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Celsius. But these are feats that can end tragically. This is an absolute limit that only a few cross, and that with enormous risk. On the other hand, we have the cold. Hypothermia is a condition in which body temperature drops below 35 degrees Celsius. The lower limit, before life processes begin to disappear rapidly and hypothermia becomes fatal, is a body temperature of about 21 degrees Celsius. Below this threshold, metabolic functions drastically slow down, the heart begins to beat irregularly, and the brain, deprived of adequate oxygen and energy, begins to malfunction. However, there have been unusual cases. For example, a 2-year-old girl from Norway survived after her body temperature dropped to just 13 7/10 degrees Celsius after falling into icy water. This condition, although extreme, can paradoxically protect the brain by slowing down its oxygen demand. However, this requires immediate, intensive medical care and is a rarity, not a rule. What about pressure? Every day, unknowingly, we experience atmospheric pressure, which is about 1 bar. However, just submerge yourself below the surface of the water to feel its power. The pressure increases by 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth. This means that at a depth of 10 meters, the pressure doubles, and at 100 meters, it is already 11 atmospheres. Divers, both recreational and deep sea, descend to considerable depths. Using specialized equipment and gas mixtures, such as trimix, a mixture of oxygen, helium, and nitrogen, to avoid oxygen toxicity and the effects of nitrogen narcosis. People are able to dive to several hundred meters. The world record in deep diving with a cylinder belongs to the Egyptian Ahmed Gabr, who in 2014 reached a depth of 332 35/100ths of a meter. His lungs were compressed to unimaginable sizes, and the pressure on his body was enormous. Even more incredible are the achievements of free divers who dive on a held breath. Record holders in this field exceed 130 meters in depth. In such conditions, their lungs shrink to the size of an orange, and the heart beats much slower, which is part of the so-called diving reflex, which helps save oxygen. It is amazing how their bodies adapt to such extreme conditions, demonstrating remarkable flexibility and the ability to cope with colossal pressure. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. This will help us create more such videos and discover more fascinating mysteries of the world. Let's move on to overloads now. What G-load can a human withstand? 1 G is a unit of acceleration equal to the acceleration of gravity. A typical person loses consciousness at a G-load of about 5 Gs, when the force of gravity pushes blood out of the brain. However, trained fighter pilots, thanks to special anti-G suits, so-called G suits that compress the legs and abdomen, and breathing techniques, can withstand up to 9 Gs. Their hearts must work at maximum mode to maintain blood flow to the brain. Interestingly, short-term overloads, such as those experienced during a jump from a plane or as a result of sudden braking, can be much greater. Astronauts have experienced G-loads of up to 45 Gs during spacecraft launches, albeit only for fractions of a second and in specially designed seats that evenly distributed forces throughout the body. The greatest overload a human has ever survived is probably the case of John Stepp, who in the 1950s, as part of military experiments to study the effects of overloads on the human body, experienced an overload of over 46 G, and in another experiment survived sudden braking from a speed of 1,017 kilometers per hour, experiencing 35 G. It was pure luck and enormous luck, but his research helped in designing safer systems for pilots and astronauts. What about pain? Pain is subjective and extremely difficult to measure. The pain scale, often measured in points from 1 to 10, allows for a subjective assessment, but does not give a complete picture. People are able to tolerate unimaginable pain in life-threatening situations, under the influence of adrenaline, which acts as a powerful natural anesthetic, or as a result of disease. There are disease states, such as neuralgia, for example, trigeminal neuralgia, kidney stones, heart attack, or childbirth, which are commonly described as generating the most intense pain. Medicine also uses the VRS, Verbal Rating Scale, or VAS, Visual Analog Scale, but ultimately the sensation of pain is individual. Nevertheless, the human body has remarkable mechanisms for coping with pain. The release of endorphins, which are natural opioids that act as powerful painkillers, allows us to survive even the most traumatic experiences. Hypnosis, meditation, or breathing techniques can also affect the perception of pain, which shows how powerful the connection between body and mind is. Resistance to pain is also genetically and psychologically determined. Some people have a higher pain threshold, others have a lower one. Now let's think about sleep deprivation. Sleep is absolutely crucial for the regeneration of the brain and body. A sleep-deprived person can function for 24 to 48 hours before serious symptoms such as hallucinations, paranoia, irritability, drastic impairment of cognitive abilities, speech disorders, and even microsleeps, during which the brain shuts down for fractions of a second, appear. The record holder for sleep deprivation is Randy Gardner, who in 1964 lasted 11 days and 25 minutes, 264 hours, without sleep, under close observation by scientists. After this time, he experienced extreme mental and physical disorders, although after returning to a normal sleep pattern, no long-term consequences were noted. Long-term sleep deprivation, even if not so extreme, leads to serious health consequences, including weakening of the immune system, concentration problems, increased risk of accidents, and chronic diseases. What about hunger and thirst? Without water, a human can survive only 3 to 7 days, depending on external conditions, temperature, humidity, level of physical activity, and individual characteristics of the body. Dehydration leads to a drastic drop in blood volume, kidney failure, electrolyte disturbances, and eventually to multiple organ failure, leading to death. Without food, the situation is slightly different. People are able to survive without food for several weeks or even months, provided they have access to water and depending on their initial body fat stores. The body then begins to draw energy from glycogen stores in the liver and muscles, and then from fat. When fat stores are depleted, the body begins to digest its own muscle proteins. Record holders in this field, such as Angus Barbieri, survived over a year, 382 days, on a diet consisting only of water, vitamins, and mineral supplements, under close medical supervision. Of course, such an extreme fast leads to drastic weight loss, serious deficiencies, muscle weakness, and even heart disorders. This is not something that should be attempted without close medical supervision. However, the ability to adapt and regenerate mentally is equally impressive. People are able to survive unimaginable tragedies, losses, conflicts, and rebuild their lives, finding the strength to move on. Mental resilience is the ability to cope with difficulties and rebuild after them. This shows that our strength lies not only in physical endurance, but also in the mind's extraordinary ability to adapt and survive. However, the ability to adapt and regenerate mentally is equally impressive. People are able to survive unimaginable tragedies, losses, conflicts, and rebuild their lives, finding the strength to move on. Mental resilience is the ability to cope with difficulties and rebuild after them. This shows that our strength lies not only in physical endurance, but also in the mind's extraordinary ability to adapt and survive. Finally, let's think about physical effort. Every day we undertake various activities, but how far can we push our body in sports? Records in the marathon or ultra runs, which exceed the limits of human endurance, show what we are capable of. A marathon, a run of 42 kilometers and 195 meters, is a challenge for the body, requiring enormous physical and mental endurance. However, it is ultra races, lasting hundreds or even thousands of kilometers, that really test the limits. In such races, the body is pushed to extremes, struggling with muscle exhaustion, dehydration, sleep deprivation, and hallucinations. Some athletes cover distances of 300, 500, or even 1,000 kilometers in difficult terrain. The ability to make such an effort is associated with a huge adaptation of the circulatory, respiratory, and muscular systems, as well as an amazing willpower. Finally, let's think about physical effort. Every day we undertake various activities, but how far can we push our body in sports? Records in the marathon or ultra runs, which exceed the limits of human endurance, show what we are capable of. A marathon, a run of 42 kilometers and 195 meters, is a challenge for the body, requiring enormous physical and mental endurance. However, it is ultra races, lasting hundreds or even thousands of kilometers, that really test the limits. In such races, the body is pushed to extremes, struggling with muscle exhaustion, dehydration, sleep deprivation, and hallucinations. Some athletes cover distances of 300, 500, or even 1,000 kilometers in difficult terrain. The ability to make such an effort is associated with a huge adaptation of the circulatory, respiratory, and muscular systems, as well as an amazing willpower. In summary, the human body is a true masterpiece of evolution, capable of surviving in conditions that often seem impossible. From extreme ambient and body temperatures, through gigantic pressures, to incredible overloads, long-term deficiencies, and exhausting physical effort, our body has built-in mechanisms that allow us to push the boundaries. We adapt, we fight for survival, we regenerate. However, let's remember that these records we have been talking about are exceptions, and testing your own limits without proper preparation and medical supervision is extremely risky and can end tragically. Let's take care of our bodies, because they are amazing, but also sensitive.